At £370, Yaesu's FT5D is pretty expensive. However, ICOM's ID52 is £520, and that looks cheap compared to Kenwood's new TH-D75 at £790. Let's talk about this guy today. Hi, I'm Jonathan M0JSX, and Kenwood's TH-D75 was first announced at Dayton Hamvention last year and finally started shipping earlier this year. And I'm very grateful to Martin Lynch & Sons and Kenwood UK for sending me this particular unit for review. But of course, as with all of my reviews, they have no editorial control over what I'm going to say, and in fact they see the video at the same time that you do when I release it to YouTube. So without further ado, let's get into having a look around the radio. We'll start at the front, which includes a very nice full colour display. Not quite as big as that we see on ICOM's ID52, but does at least feature the same transflective display quality, meaning that even in bright sunshine, in fact you can kind of see it under the lights in here, you can still see the screen even without the backlight lit. Below the screen we find the number pad down here. We also find the arrow pad, as well as, or D-pad you might call it, as well as also the enter button right in the centre. We find a menu and a mode button, as well as a function and an A/B switch. Now all of these buttons do have at least a secondary and sometimes even a tertiary function, depending on the button presses that you use. Most of the time though, it's either only a function and then that button, or the button itself in order to activate that function. On the left hand side of the radio we find a nice large easy to locate PTT button, which has a rather nice clicky feel to it. We also find the Moni and Squelch button, and also the power button, which a long press turns the radio on. On the other side of the radio we find a large rubber flap covering all of the connectors. The top has the speaker mic connector underneath it, which is the standard 2-pin affair that we're pretty used to from Kenwood now, and in fact it's the same connector that a lot of the Chinese manufacturers have also adopted. Next, below that we find a slot for a micro SD card. Below that we find the USB Type-C connector. And right at the bottom of the stack we find the barrel connector for a 12 volt DC input, and a charger is provided in the box. Also worth noting of course that the USB Type-C connector can also be used for charging. On the rear of the unit we find the belt clip, which of course comes separately in the box but has been attached to this unit, as well as the battery. Taking the battery off the radio reveals it to be the KNB75 battery, which is the same as was used on the TH-D74. And in fact a lot of the accessories for the TH-D74 can also be used on the TH-D75. So if you are upgrading, you'll find that a lot of your accessories already work. Just for reference, the KNB75 reports to be an 1820 mAh battery at 7.4 volts. On the top of the radio we find the channel selector knob, which again has a nice click and a nice definition to it, as well as a almost true potentiometer here for volume control. It feels very nice and actually goes silent when you put it all the way down. Taking off the antenna reveals an SMA female connector on the radio, which is the same that we see from a lot of the higher end manufacturers such as ICOM and Yaesu on their more top line products. It's the reverse to that we see on things like Baofeng, Quansheng, and in fact TID Radio, which I recently did a review of the TID Radio TDH3. Now, something that the Kenwood TH-D75 actually shares with the TID Radio TDH3 is that USB Type-C port, and on the TH-D75 it can be used for both charging and programming, which is nice, and I think it's something that I'd like to see more manufacturers implement, to be completely honest with you. And it's also nice that it's a Type-C connector rather than the older micro USB. Not that we're looking at anybody here. With the radio switched on, we can see that the menu structure is pretty identical to that was found on the TH-D74. And I have to be honest, it's not my favourite menu system ever. I much prefer the implementation of the menu system on ICOM's ID52. But then I also admit I may be slightly biased in the fact that I have both an ICOM IC7300, an IC705, and I'm also using at the moment an IC7610. So maybe I'm slightly biased towards that ICOM menu structure. I don't know, it just seems to click in my head. But after navigating the TH-D75 for a while, you actually realise that you're not having to go into the menu system very often. Most of the functionality that you're going to want is on the front panel for a lot of the time. Transmitted and received audio on the Kenwood TH-D75 is absolutely brilliant, as you may expect from a Kenwood product. Kenwood have always produced absolutely excellent audio quality in their products, so no change there. Something the TH-D75 has in common with its predecessor, the TH-D74, and in fact the predecessor before that, the TH-D72, is the built-in GPS with built-in TNC and onboard APRS support. If you're into APRS, then the TH-D75 is absolutely excellent for that. Also enables you to use the TNC function either over the USB connector or over Bluetooth. With a small caveat with that, I've not been able to make this particular unit work over a USB connector. I don't know whether that's me doing something wrong, whether that's a firmware problem in the radio, or whether it's this particular unit. I've not been able to make that work. I have been able to make it work over Bluetooth, and it works flawlessly over Bluetooth, following the instructions found in the manual. But just for full transparency, I haven't been able to make it work over the USB. You may have much more success than I have. Like its predecessor, the TH-D74, the TH-D75 also includes D-Star, the digital voice mode, first developed back in the early 2000s by the Japanese Amateur Radio League and often seen on a lot of ICOM products. Now, like its predecessor, the D75 also includes a near repeater functionality for D-Star repeaters and includes an updated database available from the Kenwood website. However, unlike the ICOM range of radios, the near repeater functionality does only work for D-Star repeaters. You can't search for nearby FM repeaters, which I feel to be a great shame. I think Kenwood made a big mistake not including that functionality in the D74, and they've continued that and not implementing it in the D75. And I think for me, that's the biggest reason why this radio is so near to perfection, but just falls short of the mark. The D75 also includes a wideband receiver covering HF up into VHF, UHF. Basically, it also goes down as far as the medium wave broadcast band. So although you're not going to be able to transmit on, let's say, the 20 meter amateur band, by plugging in a better external antenna, the rubber duck's not going to do great at HF, you can at least listen to activity on 20, 15 and all the other amateur HF bands and everything in between as well. A great option if you just want to take one radio with you on holiday, let's say, and maybe listen to a bit of shortwave as well. The TH-D75E, the version of this radio for Europe, covers the 2 meter and 70 centimeter amateur bands at a maximum output power of 5 watts, although that is adjustable down to about 100 milliwatts. Perfect if you're only going into a local hotspot in your house. As I've already alluded to, the radio does also have a Bluetooth on board, which, as I've already mentioned, I've successfully used for the TNC interface, but you can also pair it with a headset as well, so maybe you just want to use a set of wireless earbuds and listen to the radio. You're able to do that by using the Bluetooth functionality in the radio. So what's my overall thoughts on the TH-D75? Well, I think for me, it's clear to see that a lot of great engineering has gone into this radio. It's got a nice weight in the hand. It feels supreme, which for a radio costing the best part of £800 you would expect. However, there are a few things for me that make it very annoying that it's so near to perfection but just falls slightly short of the mark. As I've already mentioned, the fact that it doesn't do the near repeater functionality for FM repeaters is a case in point. I also find it slightly annoying that the radio doesn't have any kind of IP rating in terms of waterproofing, which is unlike both the ID52 and the FT5, which can both be submerged in water for, I think it's about half an hour in both of those radios' cases. Not such luck here, and I'm not sure I'd actually want to use the D75 out in a short range shower either for fear of breaking it. It's a shame, but it's what we live with. So what's my final take on it? Well, I think if you're after a radio that can do pretty much everything, then the D75 is a really good option. If you're after a radio that has a full wideband receiver covering not only AM and FM but also SSB and CW, then the D75 has got you covered. If you're after a radio that has a digital voice mode, in which case D-Star, then this has got you covered too. If you're after a radio that has got APRS built in with built-in GPS, then the D75 has you covered there. And of course, also a fully accessible TNC too. Again, a really good full packaged radio. It is expensive. There's no getting away from that. At £789 that it currently is an expensive option. However, if you were to, I don't know, let's say buy an ICOM ID52 and a Yaesu FT5 in order to get D-Star and APRS, well, actually, you're looking at more money. Is it worth an upgrade from the TH-D74? Probably not, unless you really want that DigiP functionality that the D75 adds. But if you do want a radio that has that legendary Kenwood build quality, as well as that awesome audio quality that Kenwood are renowned for, then the D75 is certainly a really, really good option. My thanks again to Martin Lynch & Sons and JVC Kenwood UK for the loan of the radio for review. I've enjoyed playing with it, I've enjoyed using it, and in fact the APRS functionality has been my favourite feature on this radio. I'm interested to know what you think. Comments down below please. If you've liked this video, there's a button specifically for that. There's another button that seems to do just fine too. And if you haven't already done so, please do click on that subscribe button, as it really does help me out. There's another video coming up over here that the algorithm thinks that you might like next. Until next time, 73, bye bye.